I had just returned from one of the most harrowing shifts of my life. The image of the man collapsing in front of me, the futile CPR attempts, and the helplessness in his eyes burned into my mind. I had always prided myself on my ability to save lives, to act decisively, to stay in control. But that night, I realized something painful and unavoidable. I couldn't save everyone. Sometimes, no matter how fast, how strong, how skilled, you hit a wall. And that wall was absolute. The emotional weight of failure clung to me like a second skin. I walked through my apartment, letting the silence press against me, and finally slumped onto the edge of my bed. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a friend request from someone named Chloe Hayes. I frowned, puzzled. The name didn't ring any bells. A quick glance at the profile photo, and my breath caught. A teenage girl, standing outside what I immediately recognized as Julian's clinic, smiling brightly into the camera. And the bio, Dad's work keeps him busy, but he's always around when it matters. My chest tightened. Julian. My Julian. The man I had trusted, loved, and, if I were honest, allowed myself to lean on more than I should. The realization hit me like a cold splash of water. He had a daughter, a 16-year-old girl, a whole life I had never known about. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure whether to accept the request or to bury my head in denial. I stared at the photos. Chloe was everywhere. Vacations, school events, lazy Sunday mornings in Julian's suburban home, pictures of laughter, warmth, and family routines that had never included me. The girl in the photos seemed confident, happy, entirely aware of a life I had been kept from. And Julian, he wasn't hiding. He was laughing, hugging, guiding, playing, fully present in a life that had been invisible to me. The shock was sharp and unrelenting. I tried to make sense of it. Was this new life recent? Had he been lying or simply compartmentalizing? And more painfully, what did this mean for me? For us? My mind raced. Questions, accusations, grief, all collided in a storm I couldn't tame. The truth, raw and undeniable, was there. Julian had a secret, and it wasn't trivial. It was a decade-long, fully formed reality, complete with love, presence, and loyalty to someone else. Finally, I typed a simple message to Chloe. "Hi, I'm Harper. I work with your dad. Who are you?" Her reply was immediate, casual, almost dismissive. "You must be one of Dad's colleagues?" "I'm his daughter." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not anger, not jealousy, not even sorrow. It was the crushing clarity of betrayal. He hadn't lied about small things. He had built an entire, hidden life without me, without a hint, without a trace of honesty. Everything I believed about us, about trust, about our shared understanding of life, crumbled in an instant. And in that moment, I knew something profound had shifted inside me. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was a rebirth. I couldn't save Julian. I couldn't repair what he had hidden. But I could save myself. And for the first time in years, I felt the clarity of true purpose, preserve my own life, my own integrity, my own power. The moment I read Chloe's reply, a mix of disbelief and cold clarity settled over me. She was Julian's daughter, a living, breathing confirmation of a life he had concealed. My mind refused to spin in panic or self-pity. Instead, I felt the sharp, precise focus of someone who had just been handed undeniable evidence. The betrayal was vast, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. I had to understand it, document it, and protect myself. I spent the next few hours scrolling through Chloe's profile. Every post, every picture, every small caption was like a puzzle piece of Julian's hidden world. He was everywhere in her life, attending her school plays, taking her on vacations, guiding her through ordinary moments that were never mine to witness. The images painted a picture of domestic intimacy, affection, and unwavering presence. And yet, to me, Julian had always seemed distant, preoccupied, and, sometimes, frustratingly unavailable. The contrast was staggering. Curiosity and necessity drove me further. I drafted a message carefully, keeping my tone casual but deliberate. "Chloe, can we talk? I have some questions about your dad's work, things that might affect both of us professionally." I knew that wording was a thin veil over my real intent, discovering the scope of his deception without exposing my emotional turmoil. Her response was swift, almost casual. "Sure. I can help. What do you need to know?" It was unnerving, the ease with which she responded, the way she seemed completely comfortable with Julian's compartmentalization. Every word she typed reminded me that Julian had been living a double life for years, fully aware of the consequences, yet entirely untroubled by them. He had built trust and affection elsewhere, while I remained in the dark. I realized I needed to see proof beyond social media. Screenshots and pictures could be manipulated. Confirmation from Chloe herself would be definitive. I asked her if she could share recent photos, anything that would clarify her life at home with Julian. Within an hour, she sent a series of images: family dinners, a cozy living room with Julian in the center, smiling as if his world outside of work was seamless, perfect, and untouched by lies. A cold resolve settled over me. Julian had lived this secret life for a decade, enough time to build emotional and practical structures that excluded me entirely. The truth was undeniable. The man I had trusted, admired, and cared for had concealed the most fundamental reality of his life. He hadn't failed me accidentally. He had chosen this concealment deliberately. It was the ultimate betrayal, not just personal, but professional, too. Julian's reputation for integrity was now a lie, carefully curated for public consumption. And while the shock was sharp, I felt an unfamiliar calm seep into my chest. I couldn't change what he had done, but I could reclaim control of my response. I could act decisively, strategically. I leaned back, my fingers hovering over my phone. My next step was clear. I needed someone who could operate in the shadowed corridors of power and influence, someone who understood both strategy and ruthlessness. Someone like Leo Vance. The betrayal had shown me one undeniable truth. I couldn't save Julian. I could only save myself. And this time, I intended to do it with precision. By the time I contacted Leo Vance, I had steeled myself against every emotion that Julian's betrayal could have provoked. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. They were all still present, like shadows at the edge of my mind, but I had learned to hold them at bay. My purpose was no longer personal, it was strategic. Leo was the perfect ally, not because he was kind or gentle, but because he was brilliant, ruthless, and had an instinct for turning truth into leverage. When I reached him, I didn't waste words. "Leo," I said, "I need your help. Julian has been living a double life, a secret daughter, a hidden family, and a carefully curated image that hides years of deceit. I have the evidence. I need to expose him." Leo didn't flinch or question my motives. He had always respected me professionally, and he understood the stakes. "Send it," he said simply. His voice was calm, detached, and entirely focused. That was the kind of clarity I needed in a partner now. I spent the next several hours compiling everything: Chloe's photos, the messages she had sent, social media screenshots, and the subtle inconsistencies I had noted in Julian's personal and professional life over the years. Each piece reinforced the same brutal truth. Julian had meticulously constructed a life separate from mine, living openly with a family I hadn't known existed. Leo reviewed the materials with a meticulous eye. He traced patterns, cross-referenced dates, and even flagged minor details I had overlooked. Within hours, he had begun constructing a strategy, a discreet, targeted media campaign that would protect me while questioning Julian's integrity in a way that was undeniable and irrefutable. Every move was calculated to minimize collateral damage to my own professional reputation while maximizing the impact on Julian's carefully curated image. Watching Leo work was mesmerizing. He had the precision of a surgeon and the vision of a strategist. I felt a mix of admiration and something else, a quiet thrill at the thought of aligning with someone so fearless, so capable, and so attuned to both strategy and truth. I realized then that my rebirth was no longer just about surviving Julian's betrayal. It was about finding a partnership that honored my own strength and intelligence. By the time the initial campaign launched, Julian's carefully crafted public persona began to show cracks. Social media chatter started quietly, then grew louder. Whispers of impropriety, questions about his honesty, and subtle references to ethical lapses began to circulate. But I remained untouchable. My professional image was intact, bolstered by the clarity of my evidence and the precision of Leo's execution. In the midst of it all, I felt a new energy coursing through me. I was no longer passive or reactive. I was active, deliberate, and empowered. And the most unexpected part? Leo had become more than a strategic ally. The subtle glances, the quiet understanding in shared moments, and the trust that had grown between us began to stir something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: intimacy. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by loss or deception. I felt the thrill of control, clarity, and a connection that was both powerful and safe. Julian's web of deceit might have been vast, but with Leo at my side, I was ready to dismantle it completely and to finally embrace a life and a love built on truth. The first signs of Julian's carefully maintained image beginning to fracture were subtle, almost imperceptible. A casual comment in a professional forum, a pointed question from a journalist, each seemed insignificant on its own. But with Leo's guidance, I could see the pattern forming. His double life, hidden for so many years, was beginning to show cracks. I watched quietly from the sidelines, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and relief. Julian had been a master at controlling appearances, projecting competence, charm, and integrity to everyone around him. But those facades, no matter how polished, couldn't withstand the undeniable evidence of his betrayal. The images, the messages, the meticulous timeline I had compiled, they were irrefutable. And now, they were beginning to speak for themselves. Leo and I coordinated our next steps carefully. We didn't want a scandal that would look like vengeance. We wanted truth, undeniable and structured. Each piece of evidence was placed in a context that highlighted Julian's deception while keeping my reputation intact. Social media posts were strategically framed, private channels were briefed with precision, and whispers in professional networks were seeded to create a ripple effect. The shift was gradual but steady. Colleagues who had once been charmed by Julian's charisma began asking questions, seeking clarification, and slowly withdrawing their support. Sponsors and partners grew wary, hesitant to publicly associate with someone whose private life revealed such deep duplicity. It was gratifying, not because I relished his downfall, but because justice, quiet, factual, unarguable, was finally prevailing. Meanwhile, my own life started to transform in unexpected ways. With Julian's hold on my professional and personal world weakening, I felt a renewed sense of autonomy. I could breathe, make decisions without fear, and step into opportunities one had previously deferred. My confidence, once shaken by betrayal, solidified into something unshakable. And then there was Leo. Working alongside him had begun to feel less like strategy and more like connection. There were moments in our planning sessions where our hands brushed over a laptop keyboard, or our eyes met with an understanding that didn't need words. I caught myself anticipating his thoughts, and he seemed equally attuned to mine. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of intimacy, a promise of partnership not built on pretense, but on trust, respect, and shared purpose. The culmination of the campaign came quietly, like a tide pulling away debris to reveal a clean shoreline. Julian's credibility was under scrutiny in ways he could not control. The public narrative shifted, from admiration to skepticism, from trust to cautious judgment. And through it all, I remained untarnished, positioned not as a victim, but as a professional whose integrity and foresight had ensured the truth was known. As I watched the slow but inevitable unraveling of Julian's carefully constructed life, I felt a surge of gratitude for the clarity his betrayal had forced upon me. The shock, the pain, and the anger had led me to this rebirth, a life where my power, voice, and choices were finally my own. And with Leo at my side, I was beginning to understand that this rebirth wasn't only about reclaiming my life. It was about discovering a love and partnership I could trust completely. The weeks following the launch of the campaign were transformative, both for Julian and for me. The cracks in his carefully constructed life widened each day, and with every whisper of doubt, every subtle withdrawal of support, he became more isolated. It was fascinating and satisfying to observe the unraveling not from malice, but from a place of truth and integrity. Julian's colleagues began asking uncomfortable questions, probing inconsistencies, and questioning decisions that once seemed unquestionable. Sponsors hesitated to extend contracts, citing concerns over the ethical implications of his personal deception. Even those who had admired his professional acumen could not ignore the evidence of his hidden life. It was as though the reality he had buried so deeply for years was finally breaking through, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For me, the shift was equally profound. The betrayal that had once felt like a crushing weight now felt like a catalyst, igniting a clarity I had never experienced before. I wasn't just observing Julian's downfall, I was reclaiming my own narrative. Each day, I made decisions that reflected my values, my intelligence, and my autonomy. I wasn't reactive, I was proactive. Every step I took reinforced my rebirth, my commitment to preserving my own integrity above all else. And then there was Leo. Working alongside him had evolved beyond strategy into a quiet, steady intimacy. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared awareness that we were aligned not just in purpose, but in values and vision. Our collaboration on Julian's exposure had revealed to me the depth of his loyalty, his strategic brilliance, and his capacity for care. In moments when the world felt chaotic, his presence was grounding. The subtle touches, the fleeting glances, and the private smiles shared over confidential documents hinted at a connection that was growing into something more profound than either of us had anticipated. The campaign itself had become a carefully orchestrated rhythm. Every piece of evidence was positioned with precision, every conversation and interaction leveraged to highlight truth without appearing vindictive. Leo's skill ensured that I remained above reproach, the orchestrator of clarity and justice rather than a participant in gossip or drama. I began to realize how much power there is in controlled exposure, in revealing truth while maintaining composure. As Julian's world narrowed, I felt an unusual mix of satisfaction and release. Satisfaction that honesty and evidence were prevailing. Release that the emotional burden of secrecy, betrayal, and confusion was lifting from my shoulders. Each day, I was building a life that was no longer contingent on anyone else's deception. And amidst the professional victories, there were quiet personal moments with Leo that hinted at a deeper bond. A hand on my shoulder as we reviewed documents, a shared laugh in the elevator, lingering glances across the office, small, intimate moments that built trust, comfort, and the kind of connection that promised a future I could embrace without fear. By the end of the week, I realized something profound. I was no longer living in reaction to Julian's choices. I was actively shaping my own path, and for the first time, it included someone who genuinely valued and protected me. The rebirth I had feared might leave me empty instead filled me with purpose, clarity, and the tentative, exciting spark of new love. The momentum of Julian's unraveling continued to grow, and with it, my own sense of empowerment. Each calculated move Leo and I made chipped away at the carefully maintained illusion he had built over years. What once had seemed untouchable, his reputation, his carefully curated image, his network of supporters, was now vulnerable, exposed to the undeniable clarity of truth. Leo and I had become a seamless team. We anticipated each other's thoughts, completed each other's sentences in strategy meetings, and navigated the intricate dance of public perception with precision. There was a thrill in the coordination, an intimacy born not from passion alone but from shared purpose. Every decision we made together reinforced the strength of our bond, the combination of trust, respect, and a shared understanding of the stakes. The exposure escalated in subtle yet powerful ways. Industry contacts began asking probing questions, Journalists started connecting the dots, and small but influential whispers about Julian's secret life began to circulate publicly. Each step was meticulously crafted to reveal only what could be proven. No speculation, no exaggeration. Only the hard facts. Julian's credibility faltered under the weight of his own hidden actions, and his professional network began to shift, hesitant to associate with someone whose ethics were now in question. As the campaign intensified, I found myself increasingly confident in both my professional and personal decisions. I no longer felt tethered to the past or to the person who had betrayed me. Julian's deception had been the catalyst for my rebirth, forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths and to prioritize my own life and integrity above all else. The sense of liberation was profound. I felt as though I had been holding my breath for years, and now, finally, I could exhale fully. Amidst the professional triumphs, my connection with Leo deepened in subtle, meaningful ways. It wasn't just the shared victories that drew us closer, but the quiet moments of understanding, a supportive hand on my back as we walked through the city streets, a knowing glance during tense meetings, the warmth of his presence during long strategy sessions. Our interactions carried a mix of intensity and tenderness that was entirely new to me, a balance between passion and trust one hadn't known I could have. One evening, as we reviewed the latest wave of media coverage, I caught Leo looking at me differently, with admiration, pride, and something softer, more intimate. My pulse quickened, not from fear or uncertainty, but from the recognition that this connection was real, grounded, and reciprocal. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to hide my heart or protect it from betrayal. I could allow myself to feel, to trust, and to hope. By the end of the week, Julian's isolation was complete. The networks that had once supported him were retracting, his credibility was in tatters, and his private life, meticulously hidden for so long, was finally laid bare. And in that chaos, I found clarity. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. I had reclaimed my power, my professional autonomy, and my emotional freedom. And with Leo by my side, I realized that my rebirth wasn't only about reclaiming control over my life. It was about embracing a future where love, trust, and partnership could coexist with strength, independence, and integrity. Together, we were unstoppable. The culmination of Julian's downfall was approaching, and I could feel it in every interaction, every carefully orchestrated step. The slow, deliberate unraveling of his reputation had reached a point where even his closest allies could no longer ignore the evidence. What had once been whispered speculation was now undeniable truth, documented, verified, and impossible to dismiss. Working with Leo had transformed from a professional necessity into a deeply personal alliance. We moved in tandem, anticipating each other's instincts, complementing each other's strengths, and covering for each other's blind spots. The intensity of our collaboration created a subtle intimacy, a connection that grew from shared purpose, but flourished into something tender, protective, and exhilarating. The thrill of strategy was now intertwined with the thrill of closeness, a duality that kept me grounded and inspired. As Julian's credibility continued to crumble, I felt a sense of liberation unlike anything I had known. Every media ripple, every professional consequence, every public questioning of his ethics reinforced my own sense of power. I wasn't just exposing a lie, I was reclaiming the narrative of my life, free from manipulation and deception. And the person I wanted beside me during this reclamation was no longer the man who had betrayed me, but Leo, whose loyalty, insight, and growing affection felt genuine and unshakable. One late evening, after a particularly tense day of orchestrating the release of key evidence, Leo and I walked together through the quiet city streets. The adrenaline of the day had faded, leaving a stillness that felt almost sacred. Without thinking, our hands brushed, lingered, and then intertwined. I felt an unexpected warmth, a grounding reassurance that this connection, unlike the chaos Julian had caused, was real. The intensity of our shared experiences, the trust we had built, and the mutual respect had blossomed into something undeniably intimate. In that moment, I realized that my rebirth wasn't just about survival or triumph. It was about embracing the possibility of love that didn't require compromise, deception, or fear. Leo's presence reminded me that vulnerability could coexist with strength, and that passion could flourish without sacrificing integrity. The tension in my chest eased as I allowed myself to lean into the connection, to feel the protective and reassuring warmth of someone who truly had my back. The final stages of Julian's exposure were executed with precision. Regulatory inquiries, professional scrutiny, and targeted media pieces confirmed what I already knew. His carefully hidden life and manipulations could no longer sustain themselves. Julian's world had collapsed under the weight of evidence, and his isolation was complete. Meanwhile, I remained untarnished, positioned not as a victim, but as the orchestrator of truth, resilience, and justice. As we returned to the office to finalize the last steps of the campaign, Leo's hand remained on mine. There was no need for words. The quiet intimacy, the unspoken understanding, and the shared triumph were more powerful than any conversation. I had emerged from betrayal and near destruction stronger, wiser, and deeply connected to someone who valued truth as much as I did. For the first time in years, I could imagine a future that wasn't tainted by deceit or compromise. I had survived, I had reclaimed my life, and I had found a love that was fierce, loyal, and real. The final pieces of Julian's carefully hidden life fell into place with a precision that felt almost cinematic. Regulatory bodies confirmed irregularities, colleagues quietly distanced themselves, and the media, guided by Leo's strategic touch, painted an unassailable portrait of a man whose duplicity had spanned years. Julian's empire of pretense crumbled, leaving him isolated, scrutinized, and utterly powerless. Watching the outcome unfold, I felt no satisfaction in vengeance, only the serenity of truth prevailing. I had entered this process with anger and shock, but I emerged with clarity, control, and an undeniable sense of empowerment. Every step I had taken, documenting evidence, consulting Chloe, coordinating with Leo, had been deliberate, thoughtful, and strategic. Julian's downfall was the inevitable consequence of his choices, and my integrity remained unscathed. And yet, the most profound change wasn't external, it was internal. I had learned the value of self-preservation, the necessity of trust, and the power of aligning myself with someone who respected both. Leo had become more than a tactical partner. He was a confidant, a protector, and a burgeoning love I had never expected to find amidst chaos. In the quiet aftermath of Julian's exposure, we spent long evenings reviewing the final pieces of evidence, sharing moments of relief, laughter, and growing closeness. There was a softness to him I had glimpsed before, now fully realized, the warmth behind the strategic brilliance, the loyalty behind the calculated moves, the patience behind the intensity. Each day together deepened our bond, allowing me to trust, to feel, and to anticipate a future built on honesty and mutual respect. One night, as the city lights reflected softly through the office windows, Leo reached for my hand. His touch was firm yet gentle, an unspoken promise that he would never use my vulnerability against me. I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for his presence, but for the journey that had brought me here, from betrayal to clarity, from shock to empowerment, from solitude to a love grounded in truth. "I've never felt so alive," I whispered, leaning into him. "And so safe." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that illuminated the intensity in his eyes. "You've earned this, Harper. All of it." As we stood there, holding each other in quiet triumph, I realized that my rebirth was complete. Julian's deception could no longer touch me, and I had stepped fully into a life defined by clarity, integrity, and love. Every lesson, every moment of betrayal, every strategic choice had led me here, to safety, to empowerment, and to a relationship that was real in every sense. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to guard myself against false promises or hidden lives. With Leo, I could be entirely present, entirely alive, and entirely myself. We had not just survived the storm of deceit. We had emerged stronger, closer, and ready to build a life that celebrated honesty, trust, and the rare, quiet joy of a fiercely earned HEA. The night settled around us like a soft cloak, and I knew with certainty that this was only the beginning. A life reclaimed, a love secured, and a future that was entirely ours.